November 23, 1942. Western outskirts of Stalingrad, near the frozen bend of the Don River. The sky is a hard, pale gray, the kind that swallows sound. Snow crunches under boots, sharp as breaking glass. Somewhere far off, artillery thumps like a giant hammer striking iron, each impact rolling through the frozen ground and into the chest. Captain Ivan Petrovich Sokolov, Red Army artillery officer, raises his binoculars and squints into the haze. Above him, engines. Not Soviet. Not yet. A distant droning grows louder, uneven, strained, the sound of aircraft pushed beyond comfort. You hear it before you see it, a metallic hum stretched thin by cold air and fear. Sokolov lowers the binoculars and exhales slowly, a white cloud hanging in front of his face. "They're coming again," he mutters. Around him, men of the 62nd Army crouch behind snow-packed earthworks and shattered brick. Their uniforms are stiff with ice, rifles wrapped in rags to keep metal from freezing to skin. Anti-aircraft crews grip the steel of their 37mm M1939 guns, fingers numb despite gloves. Someone stamps their feet. Someone else spits, the saliva freezing before it hits the ground. Only a week earlier, this place had been chaos, gunfire, screams, retreating Germans. Then the jaws closed. Operation Uranus. The Soviet counteroffensive had smashed through the weaker Romanian flanks north and south of Stalingrad. Tank columns, T-34s with frost-covered turrets, surged westward, cutting roads, overrunning depots, swallowing villages whole. On November 23rd, Soviet spearheads met near Kalich-on-Don. The German 6th Army was surrounded. More than 250,000 men, German, Romanian, Italian auxiliaries, trapped inside a shrinking pocket of rubble and snow. Sokolov had been there when the news crackled through the field radio. He remembered the look on the political officer's face, not joy, not relief, something harder, something colder. Now, the officer had said, they will starve. But the Germans did not surrender. Not yet. Instead, word filtered through Soviet intelligence channels within days. Intercepted signals, prisoner interrogations, aerial reconnaissance. Hermann Goering, Reichsmarschall of the Luftwaffe, had made a promise directly to Hitler. The 6th Army would be supplied by air. Sokolov had laughed when he first heard it. A short, humorless bark that turned into a cough. By air, he'd said. In winter, in this weather. An older sergeant beside him had shaken his head slowly. Let them try. Now, on this gray November morning, they were trying. The sound grows louder. The cloud cover breaks just enough to reveal dark shapes sliding out of the sky. Junkers, Ju-52 transport planes, 3-engined workhorses of the Luftwaffe, bellies heavy with cargo. Some fly low, dangerously low, their propellers biting at frozen air. Others circle, searching for drop zones marked by faint signal flares inside the pocket. Sokolov raises his binoculars again. He can see the black crosses on the wings. He can almost imagine the pilots inside. Young men, older men, faces tight with concentration, knowing what waits below. Range, he calls. 2,000 meters. An AA gun commander shouts back. The order had come down days earlier. Do not waste ammunition. Wait. Let them commit. The Soviets had learned quickly. The Germans needed at least 500 tons of supplies per day to keep the 6th Army alive. Food, fuel, ammunition, medical equipment. The Luftwaffe could barely deliver a fraction of that on a good day. On a bad day with fog, snowstorms, and Soviet fighters, deliveries collapsed entirely. And now, Soviet guns ringed the pocket. Not just anti-aircraft artillery, but machine guns, mortars, even riflemen trained to fire at descending parachutes. Anything that floated down from the sky was fair game. The first Ju-52 dips lower. Too low. Sokolov sees the muzzle flashes before he hears them. Fire. The order ripples down the line. The air erupts. AA guns hammer upward, shells ripping into the sky with sharp, cracking bursts. Tracer rounds streak red and white, climbing fast. The sound is deafening, a metallic roar layered over the deeper thunder of artillery. A shell detonates just off the transport's port wing. The wing shudders. Smoke pours out. The plane lurches, engines screaming unevenly. Inside the cockpit, you can almost feel it, the sudden loss of control, the sickening realization that altitude is gone, that there is no room to recover. The Ju-52 banks hard, then clips its own parachute-laden cargo being pushed out the rear. The aircraft rolls, nose dipping sharply. Men on the ground shout. Someone cheers. Someone crosses himself. The plane slams into the snowfields beyond the riverbank, erupting in a fireball that briefly warms the frozen air. Black smoke coils upward, thick and oily, visible for kilometers. Sokolov lowers his binoculars. His jaw tightens. "That's one," he says quietly. Above, more aircraft approach, undeterred, desperate. And for the first time, as he watches supply crates blossom uselessly into Soviet-controlled ground, Sokolov understands something vital. This is no rescue. It is a trap, and the Germans are flying straight into it. November 26, 1942. Southern edge of the Stalingrad pocket. Near Pitomnik airfield. The snow is no longer clean. It is churned black and brown by boots, fuel spills, and blood, frozen into rippled layers like dirty glass. The wind howls across the open steppe, carrying the stench of smoke and burned aviation fuel. Captain Ivan Sokolov stands inside a hastily dug observation trench, overlooking a wide, flat stretch of ground once marked on German maps as a lifeline. Pitomnik airfield. What remains of it is a scar. The runway is cratered, patched with frozen dirt and wreckage. Burned-out aircraft litter the perimeter, twisted aluminum ribs, snapped propeller blades, fuselages split open like gutted fish. Some still smolder days after impact, the fire trapped beneath snow. Sokolov adjusts his scarf and peers through binoculars again. Another formation approaches. This time lower. Faster. Fighters with them, a spotter calls out. Sokolov sees them, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, darting nervously above the transports, wings flashing briefly through breaks in the cloud. They are stretched thin, fuel-starved, forced to escort slow cargo planes through a corridor the Soviets are tightening by the hour. The Luftwaffe has adapted, flying at dawn and dusk, hugging cloud cover, changing drop zones constantly. But the Red Army has adapted faster. New AA batteries have been dragged forward by horse teams and half-frozen men. 85mm guns now sit camouflaged under white sheets. Machine gun nests line likely drop corridors. Even infantry units are briefed. Watch the sky. Inside the pocket, German flares go up, weak orange sparks against the gray sky, marking where supplies are needed most. Wounded units. Isolated regiments. Command posts burning through their last ammunition. But many of those flares now mark death. The first transport begins its descent toward Pitomnik, wheels down, flaps extended. It is dangerously slow, a fat target in a sky filled with Soviet steel. "Wait," Sokolov says. The AA crews hold. Sweat beads under helmets despite the cold. Fingers itch on triggers. At 1,200 meters, Sokolov nods. Now. The guns speak again. The sky fractures. Shells burst around the aircraft in sharp white flashes. One detonates directly beneath the fuselage. Shrapnel tears upward, ripping through the belly of the plane. The Ju-52 jolts violently. A parachute spills prematurely from the rear hatch, then another, then bodies. Not jumpers. Cargo handlers blown clear by the blast, tumbling end over end, their chutes failing to open in the chaos. The aircraft slams onto the runway hard, landing gear collapsing. It skids sideways, sparks spraying, before crashing into the wreck of another transport. Flames leap instantly, fed by fuel and canvas. The escorts peel away, engines screaming, unable to linger. Sokolov lowers the binoculars slowly. "They won't land many more like that," a lieutenant beside him says. Sokolov doesn't answer. He's watching something else. Beyond the airfield, dozens of parachutes drift down, white blossoms against gray sky. Supply canisters, food crates, ammunition boxes. Some land inside the pocket. Many do not. Soviet infantry are already moving. Small figures break from cover, sprinting across the snow, rifles slung as they race toward the descending cargo. Shots crack, German sentries firing blindly, trying to defend supplies they no longer have the strength to retrieve. A crate hits the ground hard and splits open. Frozen bread loaves scatter across the snow. Another parachute tangles in the skeletal remains of a destroyed plane, its cargo swinging uselessly just out of reach. Sokolov remembers a report from 2 days earlier. German soldiers found eating horse carcasses, boots boiled for leather. Ammunition rationed to a handful of rounds per man per day. Wounded left untreated, morphine gone. And yet Göring's promise still echoes across the battlefield, a lie sustained by burning aircraft and dead pilots. A runner arrives, breathless, snow crusting his eyelashes. "Captain, new orders from Army headquarters." Sokolov takes the folded paper, gloved hands stiff. "Increase fire density. Priority targets, transports on final approach. Do not engage fighters unless necessary. Ammunition resupply en route." He nods once, hands the paper back. The message is clear. This is no longer harassment. This is extermination. Above them, another wave appears, fewer planes now. Gaps in formation. Pilots forced to fly longer routes as Soviet fighters contest the skies. One transport releases its cargo too early, parachutes opening high, drifting far off course. The wind carries them directly towards Soviet lines. A young gunner beside Sokolov laughs, a sharp, surprised sound. "They're dropping it to us now." Sokolov doesn't smile. He watches the falling supplies and thinks of the men inside the pocket, men who still believe rescue is coming, who still wait for engines in the sky. What they are receiving instead is hope in fragments, scattered, burning, unreachable. The corridor is burning, and it is closing. December 3, 1942. North of Stalingrad. Soviet forward observation post overlooking the Gumrak sector. The cold has changed. It is no longer sharp. It is heavy, crushing, a weight that presses down on bone and thought alike. Breath crystallizes instantly. Metal burns skin. Sound travels farther, thinner, carrying the echo of engines long before shapes appear. Captain Ivan Sokolov pulls his greatcoat tighter as he climbs onto the snow-packed parapet. Below him, the frozen steppe stretches outward, broken by shell craters and blackened aircraft carcasses half buried in drifts. Gumrak Airfield lies ahead, or what used to be an airfield. The runway is now a patchwork of ice and rubble. Wrecked transports dot the field like tombstones, their tails jutting skyward at unnatural angles. Some bear hastily painted red crosses, medical evacuation planes destroyed before they ever lifted off. The Germans still come, but not as they once did. Sokolov raises his binoculars at the sound of approaching engines. He counts automatically. 1, 2, 3. Only 5 Ju-52s this time. No tight formation. No confidence. They fly low beneath the cloud ceiling, engines coughing, propellers rimed with ice. Their escorts are gone, reassigned, destroyed, or grounded by fuel shortages. Inside the German pocket, the situation has turned desperate. Soviet artillery has crept closer, shelling runways daily. Pitomnik has already been abandoned, rendered unusable by craters and wreckage. Gumrak is the last viable landing strip, and it is barely holding together. Sokolov knows this because prisoners talk now. Captured Luftwaffe ground crews, frostbitten and hollow-eyed, tell of pilots refusing missions. of transports taking off overloaded, flying without navigation lights, landing blind through snow squalls because turning back means court-martial, or worse. Goring's promise has become an order. And orders kill. Target approaching from the west, a spotter murmurs. The first transport lines up for landing. Sokolov waits. The plane descends through flurries of snow, its shadow skimming the ground. For a moment it almost looks peaceful, the way it settles, wheels brushing the runway, fuselage shuddering as it touches down. Then a Soviet shell lands just short of the strip. The explosion throws up ice and earth. Shrapnel slashes into the aircraft's starboard engine. Flames burst outward instantly, fed by leaking fuel. The plane slews violently, veers off the runway, and plows into a snowbank at full speed. The cockpit collapses. No one climbs out. The remaining transports abort their approach, engines roaring as they claw for altitude. One is hit almost immediately, a clean strike to the wing root. The wing folds, snapping backward, and the aircraft spins downward in a slow, horrible spiral. Sokolov tracks it with his binoculars until it disappears behind a ridge. The impact comes seconds later, a dull, distant thump. A lieutenant exhales slowly. "That one was carrying wounded," he says. Not a question. Sokolov nods. They all know. Inside the pocket, wounded men are stacked in hangars, wrapped in blankets stiff with frost. Many have been waiting weeks for evacuation, for a flight that may never come. The Germans have begun prioritizing rank. Generals go first. Staff officers. Specialists. The infantry stays. Sokolov lowers the binoculars and rubs his eyes. He hasn't slept more than a few hours at a time in weeks. Every dawn and dusk brings more aircraft, more smoke, more fire. And still they come. Another plane appears, flying alone, dangerously low. It drops its cargo without even attempting to land. Parachutes bloom. One fails to open. The crate hits the ground like a bomb, exploding into splinters and frozen meat. Soviet troops cheer faintly from the trenches. Sokolov feels nothing. He thinks of the German pilots, men trained to fight, now reduced to flying supply trucks into a furnace. He thinks of the soldiers inside Stalingrad, starving, freezing, clinging to a promise already broken. A radio crackles beside him. "Captain Sokolov, message from Army HQ." He takes the handset. "Go ahead." The Luftwaffe's delivery rate has fallen below 70 tons per day. Command estimates the enemy requires at least 500 to survive. Sokolov closes his eyes briefly. 70. Not even close. The voice continues. New directive, intensify fire during evening drops. Enemy morale assessed as critical. Sokolov acknowledges and hands the radio back. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, the sky turns a bruised purple. Snow begins to fall again, thick, blinding. Perfect weather for Soviet guns. Terrible weather for pilots forced to keep Goring's promise alive. Sokolov watches the sky darken and knows the truth now, with absolute clarity. The airlift is not sustaining the Sixth Army. It is prolonging its death. December 15, 1942. Inside the shrinking Stalingrad encirclement. Soviet artillery observation sector, overlooking the ruins between Gumrak and the tractor factory. Night comes early now. By mid-afternoon, the light is already fading, the sun a pale disk smeared behind snow clouds. The temperature has fallen to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The Volga is a slab of ice. Even the guns groan when they fire, metal protesting metal. Captain Ivan Sokolov stands beside his battery as dusk settles in, watching the sky for shapes that no longer arrive in strength. When the engines come, there are fewer of them. 3, maybe 4. They sound wrong, strained, uneven, as if the aircraft themselves are exhausted. A runner brings fresh intelligence reports, their edges stiff with frost. Sokolov scans them quickly. German daily rations inside the pocket have dropped again. 100 grams of bread per man, sometimes less. Ammunition allotments cut to a handful of cartridges. Horses gone. Dogs gone. Rats hunted when they can be found. And still, Goering orders flights. The first aircraft appears low over the ruins, barely clearing shattered smokestacks and skeletal apartment blocks. It does not circle. It does not search for flares. It simply opens its cargo bay. Supplies spill out into darkness. Parachutes snap open some. Others tangle immediately, cords freezing stiff as wire. Crates slam into buildings, burst apart in clouds of flour and frozen fat. One container smashes through the roof of a bombed-out factory, vanishing into blackness. Inside those ruins, German soldiers scramble. Sokolov watches through binoculars as small figures stagger into the open, gaunt silhouettes moving like old men. They fall, get up, drag themselves toward the falling lifelines. Soviet artillery opens fire. Not directly at the men, not yet, but at the drop zone itself. Shells walk across the area methodically, tearing the ground apart, flipping crates into the air, shredding parachutes before they hit. The effect is merciless. Supplies meant to sustain an army become shrapnel. A German machine gun opens up in desperation, tracers snapping wildly into the night sky. A Soviet mortar answers immediately. The gun goes silent. One Ju-52 takes a hit as it climbs away. Fire blossoms from its engine, bright and sudden. The plane loses altitude rapidly, clips the top of a ruined building, and cartwheels into the darkness beyond the riverbank. There is no explosion this time. Just a dull, final impact. Sokolov lowers his binoculars slowly. He feels the weight of it now, not triumph, not satisfaction, but inevitability. The airlift has turned into a cruel theater, where hope is dropped from the sky only to be obliterated before it can be touched. A political officer approaches, boots crunching. Recon units report German soldiers firing on their own supply drops, he says quietly. Sokolov looks at him. To keep others away. The officer nods. Units fighting units, over bread, over frozen meat. Sokolov exhales. He remembers a German prisoner taken the day before, a corporal from an infantry regiment. The man's uniform had hung on him like rags. His hands shook uncontrollably as he spoke. "They tell us the planes are coming," the prisoner had said. "Every day, always tomorrow." Another wave arrives just before full dark. 2 aircraft only. They fly so low Sokolov can hear individual engines misfiring. One drops its cargo directly over Soviet positions, a navigational error caused by snow squalls and failing instruments. Parachutes open. Soviet soldiers rush forward, laughing in disbelief as crates land intact among their trenches. Inside, German bread, frozen sausage, rifle ammunition. A lieutenant holds up a loaf, turning it over in his hands. "They're feeding us now," he says. No one laughs. Sokolov watches the remaining plane vanish into the snowstorm and realizes the final cruelty of the airlift. Every flight convinces the trapped Germans that survival is still possible. Every flight ensures they will hold out just a little longer, long enough to starve, freeze, and bleed completely dry. Above the ruins of Stalingrad, the sky no longer offers rescue. Only hunger. January 10, 1943. Dawn. Eastern perimeter of the Stalingrad pocket. The bombardment begins before the sun rises. It starts as a low rumble, distant, rolling, then builds into something immense. Thousands of Soviet guns fire almost as one, the sound flattening the air, shaking frost loose from ruined walls, sending vibrations through bone and breath alike. Operation Ring has begun. Captain Ivan Sokolov stands beside his artillery battery, stopwatch in hand, timing the fire missions with mechanical precision. The cold is absolute now. -35. Oil has been thinned. Breech blocks heated with torches just to keep them moving. Shells scream overhead in endless waves. The German positions across the snowfields simply disappear. Where trenches had been, there are now shallow craters. Where buildings had stood, there are clouds of brick dust and smoke. Fires ignite briefly, then die, starved by cold and lack of fuel. And above it all, silence. No engines. Sokolov notices it almost unconsciously at first. Between artillery salvos, there is no distant droning, no desperate mechanical hum in the sky. He looks up. Nothing. For weeks, even months, the sound of German aircraft had been constant, at dawn, at dusk, sometimes in the dead of night. Now the sky is empty, pale and still. The Luftwaffe has stopped coming. Reports confirm it within hours. Gumrak is lost. The last serviceable airfield has been overrun. Transports that attempt drops are shot down before reaching the pocket. Fuel stocks at Luftwaffe bases are exhausted. Pilots refuse missions they know are suicidal. Göring's promise has finally collapsed under its own weight. Inside the pocket, the effect is immediate. Captured German positions reveal abandoned weapons, frozen corpses slumped where they fell, rifles still clutched in hands blackened by frostbite. Ammunition boxes sit empty. Medical stations are silent. No bandages, no morphine, no heat. Prisoners stumble forward in small groups now, hands raised weakly. Many cannot speak. Some cannot walk. Sokolov watches them pass, living skeletons wrapped in field-gray cloth, eyes sunken, beards matted with ice. One man looks up at the sky repeatedly, as if expecting something to appear. Nothing does. A Soviet infantry captain pauses near Sokolov's position. They kept listening for engines, he says quietly. Even last night. Sokolov nods once. The artillery barrage continues all day, methodical, crushing, designed not for breakthrough but for erosion, breaking what little cohesion remains. German counterfire is sporadic, weak, often misdirected. There are no more flares. No more drop zones. Just ruins being pounded into finer ruin. On January 16th, Soviet troops capture what remains of Pitomnik and Gumrak completely. The battlefield is littered with aircraft wrecks, dozens upon dozens, each one a marker of a promise made too easily. Sokolov walks among them briefly after the fighting moves forward. He sees German transport markings burned black, cockpit glass shattered, cargo still strapped inside, medicine, ammunition, food that never reached the men who needed it. One wreck still smells of burned flesh. A sergeant nearby shakes his head. All for nothing, he mutters. Sokolov does not answer. He thinks of the first aircraft he shot down in November, of the weeks of falling crates, drifting parachutes, burning wrecks, of men who starved while watching supplies fall from the sky, always just out of reach. The airlift did not save the Sixth Army. It trapped it in false hope. As evening falls, the guns finally fall silent. For the first time in months, Stalingrad is quiet, a dead, frozen quiet, broken only by wind and the distant sound of footsteps moving forward into history. January 31st, 1943. Central Stalingrad. Ruins near the Univermag department store. The city no longer looks like a city. It is a field of broken stone and frozen shadows, walls standing without rooms, staircases leading nowhere. Snow drifts through collapsed factories and shattered apartments, filling them like graves. The air smells of smoke, rot, and cold iron. Captain Ivan Sokolov moves forward with a Soviet liaison group, boots crunching softly. There is no artillery now. No small arms fire. Only the wind. Somewhere ahead, a white flag flutters weakly. Inside the ruins near the Univermag, German officers stand waiting, thin, unshaven, uniforms hanging loose. Their breath fogs the air as they speak in quiet, exhausted tones. One of them removes his gloves with trembling hands. General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the Sixth Army, has surrendered. The news moves through Soviet lines quickly, almost disbelievingly. Soldiers pause. Some stare. Some sit down heavily in the snow. Others simply close their eyes. Sokolov listens as an interpreter relays fragments of German conversation, mentions of starvation, of frozen wounded who never woke up, of men who kept asking when the planes would return. Even now, outside, Soviet troops begin escorting prisoners out of the ruins. They come in waves, tens, then hundreds, then thousands. Many are barely recognizable as soldiers. Some lean on sticks. Some are carried. A few collapse and do not rise again. One German lieutenant stops near Sokolov, eyes hollow, voice hoarse. "We saw them," he says in broken Russian. "The planes, every day, burning." Sokolov meets his gaze. "Yes," he replies quietly. "We saw them too." The lieutenant nods once, as if that answers everything. Later that afternoon, Sokolov climbs a rise overlooking the city. From here he can see the entire battlefield, the Volga frozen solid, the ruins stretching endlessly, the scars carved by months of fire. The sky above is empty. No contrails. No engines. No falling parachutes. Just silence. A staff officer joins him, holding a clipboard stiff with cold. "Final count coming in," the officer says. "More than 90,000 prisoners, tens of thousands dead, the rest gone." Sokolov nods slowly. He thinks back to November, to the first aircraft appearing through gray clouds, to Goring's promise echoing across radio waves, to supplies drifting down into Soviet guns. The airlift had been meant to defy reality. Instead, reality answered with fire. As evening falls, the sun dips behind the ruins, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Somewhere, a Soviet soldier begins to sing softly, a low, tired melody that carries through the broken streets. Sokolov removes his gloves and rubs his hands together, feeling the ache return. The war is far from over. But here at Stalingrad, the sky has rendered its verdict. No more drops. No more hope from above. Only the frozen ground and the end.